And I also want to thank you for inviting me to speak about the fuel market during an incredibly fascinating time for the fuel market. So I hope this really is more of a conversation. There's a lot going on, and I hope I can share some information that is interesting and also helpful. I also hope to be able to learn from some of you as we talk about what's going on and what we can do as far as owners and operators of transportation companies during these crazy times. And today's presentation, we're going to go from a global market view of what's going on with fuel prices, and then we're going to bring it down to a national and a state level. And we're going to try to stay out of the political side of this, especially when we get to the state side. Now, we can go there if you guys want. That's all right. But yeah, we'll talk about what's driving prices and driving the market. So 3 things that we're going to talk about today, and hopefully we're going to take away why prices are moving so much here recently. Yeah, we all know what's going on in the Middle East, but we're going to talk about a few other cost drivers as well. What changes in the near term? What doesn't change in the near term? And lastly, how do we protect our profit margins as business operators? So the last several months, the fuel market's been pretty interesting. Now this graph really isn't up to date because we didn't update it from about 10 days ago, right? So it was a bit of a whipsaw here. Prices were relatively stable for several months. And then we came to February 28th. And of course, the Middle East lit up a little bit in February. And we see what happened to prices. Price of crude oil, which is represented here in this chart, which was pretty stable, kind of around $70 a barrel, kind of bumping around between 60 to 80, but an average of $70 a barrel, jumped up to a high of $138 a barrel. I think we all know why that happened. But let me ask you this. Prior to February 28th, and answer this honestly, how many of you could point to where the Strait of Hormuz was, or even knew what the Strait of Hormuz was? Okay, we got a few of you. Okay, since then, raise your hand if you know what the Strait of Hormuz is. Okay, yes. So what is going on with this Strait of Hormuz? And why is it so important? So let's talk about that a little bit, because that's really been a key driver of what's going on with oil prices. When the hostilities broke out in the Middle East, the Iranian regime has been very successful in locking things down with this narrow stretch of ocean that separates the country of Qatar from Iran. It's about a 20-mile wide stretch of ocean through which about 1/3 of the seaborne oil supply, global oil supply, goes through that 20-mile strait. Pretty crazy when you think about that. And the Iranian regime has been very successful, even though, I don't know if this is legit, the federal government's saying their entire navy's at the bottom of the Persian Gulf, but they've been very successful with small speedboats and with sea mines, and they've really choked off the oil supply from coming out of the Persian Gulf. Well, what does that do to fuel prices? Well, an easy way to think about how crude oil directly impacts what you're paying for gasoline, diesel, is look at it this way. $1 in crude oil, $1 change equates to about a 3 to 4 cent per gallon change in gasoline and diesel. So that's what's going on. And so when we saw crude oil jump from called $70 a barrel to $120, $130 a barrel, that's why we saw a $1.50, $2 per gallon increase in diesel prices. Because this is quite fascinating what's going on in the Middle East, let's talk about it a little bit. Anybody heard any recent estimates of how many ships, not just oil tankers, just ships are sitting in the Persian Gulf at this point in time because they can't get through? 1,500. I wanted to see a pic, this shows a lot of ships, so this is a recent photo of ships just sitting out there, anchored, no place to go. So I wonder what all the sailors are doing. They've been stuck there for quite a while. That's the best photo I could find, trying to just show a bunch of ships over there. There's another way to look at it. Every one of those is a ship, and most of those aren't moving. 1,500 sitting in the Persian Gulf. What else is going on? Well, there's been some of that going on. This particular photo, this is a photograph from an attack that happened on March 19th of the Las Rafin industrial city in Qatar. Why is this a big deal? This is a massive petrochemical facility. So it's not just that the oil is getting choked off in the Strait of Hormuz. It's also very big, expensive, important facilities like this have been severely damaged. This particular facility, this one facility supplies 20% of the global supply of LNG, and it was severely damaged. Shell Oil Company opened up a plant in 2015 that's part of this industrial complex. They invested $15 billion. That one facility called the Pearl plant was heavily damaged. That one plant produces 20% of the global supply of synthetic lubricants. So we've seen large increases in diesel. For those of you that do operate fleets, have you looked at your lubricant prices lately? On a percentage basis, your lubricants have probably gone up more than your fuel has gone up. Now, obviously, fuel is a much larger cost for our fleet operations, but there has been a significant increase in the price per gallon of lubricant, and this is a big reason why. So, looking at our crystal ball, what's going to happen? You guys ready for it? Okay. I texted President Trump last night. I get texts from him. You get texts from him as well. I get texts from him. He says, I need to be a patriot and I need to donate. But he never replies back. So, yeah, I tried texting him one of those texts I got, but no, it didn't work. So, what's going to happen in the long term around pricing? It's really anybody's guess. Are things going to settle down in the Middle East? We don't know. What's interesting is there were experts in the oil industry who said if major hostilities broke out, like what we have seen this spring, they would expect to see prices go above $200 a barrel. We did touch at 138. That's the highest that we reached this spring, but those prices have came down. Even 2 weeks ago, prices were back down into the low $80 a barrel. They have gone back up because what many expected, there was going to be a breakthrough in negotiations between the U.S. government and the Iranian regime, but those talks have since stalled, and we've seen crude oil reverse, go up about $10 to $15 per barrel just in the last 10 days. If hostilities were to end fairly soon and there were to be an agreement brokered, we would see prices come down pretty quick. In the absence of that, there's a real risk that over the next few months, prices do continue to climb. Why is that? Right, the prices have been buffered because many countries, not just the United States, but other countries as well, have released strategic reserves to try to stabilize the pricing. The U.S. reserves, as well as many other countries' reserves, are becoming depleted at a pretty quick pace. We are seeing demand globally come down some. Obviously, with these higher prices, there are parts of the world that are really struggling with fuel supply. Fortunately, here in the United States, we are sheltered from this because we have tremendous crude oil supply as well as very strong refining capacity as well. So short term, do we expect to continue to see volatility? Yes, we do. If something is brokered as far as on a peace deal, things will settle down probably pretty quick. It will take several months, maybe even a year or so to get the oil market back to where it was pre the hostilities breaking out. Other things that can drive oil prices and fuel prices in the near term are what we call refinery turnarounds. And we just got through a whole slate of refinery turnarounds. That's where they shut down the refineries, typically in the spring and in the fall for several days to do major maintenance. We just got through several refinery turnarounds here on the West Coast. The refineries are operating at a very high level right now, so the refining capacity is very strong. The other thing that plays into our fuel prices is the cost of distribution of the fuel. cost of tankers, trucks to move that product around. So what doesn't change when it comes to fuel prices, at least not in the short term? One, U.S. production as far as oil has been very, very robust, and that actually brings up a great point. So why haven't we seen oil prices and fuel prices go up as much as some experts thought? We already touched on the strategic reserves that have been tapped. The other thing that's coming into play, even though a lot of Middle East oil has came offline, the market is very resilient. Participants in the global oil market are finding workarounds. What are some of those workarounds? Well, several countries are now producing crude oil at record rates, including the United States, but not just the US. Other countries like Brazil, Venezuela's production has increased over the last several months significantly. So these countries are trying to make up for the shortfall that from the crude oil that's been taken offline coming out of the Middle East. The other thing that's happening is there are some oil tankers that are getting through the Strait of Hormuz. We don't hear a lot about it in the news. What's going on there? Countries that have positive relationships with Iran are getting some oil tankers through. They're making payments to the Iranian regime, and they're being protected, and they're coming through. Experts estimate that about 10% of what was flowing through the strait before is still making its way through. The other thing that's going on is there's a pipeline that runs from east to west in Saudi Arabia. That pipeline wasn't used that much prior to February 28th, but once hostilities broke out, there's now a lot of crude oil that's being shipped across Saudi Arabia to ports over in the Red Sea. Point is, the global oil market is adjusting in real time to having supply cut off. So even though about upwards of 20 million barrels on a daily basis was cut off, the market is finding workarounds to work through that. In the US, we're in a very good supply position for crude oil, very balanced as far as what we need here domestically. On a refining basis, we actually refine more gasoline and diesel jet fuel than what we can consume as a country. So we're actually in a net exporter position. Maybe this is kind of a dirty little secret. You don't hear a lot about it in the news, but when you look at the US GDP, what's going on over in the Middle East is actually a net positive. You may not want to look at it that way. Consumers obviously are getting squeezed with the higher energy prices, but the US on a national level is making a lot of money selling crude oil and refined petroleum products. Other things that we don't see changing here in the near term, diesel demand has been very robust in the United States. We don't see that changing. The economy seems to be fairly resilient, so the demand seems to be there, so we don't see that a decrease in demand is really going to happen, at least in the US market in the near term. Not a significant drop off. The other thing, Washington policy, we're going to get into that a little bit in more detail. What's driving prices here in Washington? All right, so that's kind of the global national level. Let's start talking about the state level. All right, this is the interactive part here. Diesel prices in Washington. What you fill in the expletive is going on. Okay? Let me ask you this. How many of you would say diesel in Washington we're one of the top 10 highest priced states for diesel in the country? Keep your hand up. All right. Keep your hand up if you think it's top 5. Keep your hand up if you think it's top 3. Top 2. Number 1. Okay. Who's number 1? California. They always got to take that top ranking. I mean, good for them. The California Brain Trust, yes. Let's shut down. So 2 major refineries just shut down in the last year in California. These were refineries that used to be able to operate profitably. The owners of those refineries, Valero and P66, they begged the state government to work with them on some of the regulations so that they could keep operating those refineries. The government said, we don't need you. So fortunately to their brain trust down there, they get top ranking for diesel prices and gas. What's number 2 state?
Hawaii.
Hawaii. Yes, then Washington. So we're number 3. Now, what's interesting is the reasons for why California is number 1, Washington's number 2, or sorry, number 3, and Hawaii's number 2. A little bit different. Hawaii, I mean, the product's got to get shipped to Hawaii, and so a lot of that's distribution costs. California, they require funky blends of fuel and all of that are required by the California Air Resource Board. So that drives a lot of that price in there. And California now is a net importer, where they used to be able to export. Years ago, we used to get, not that many years ago, we used to get a lot of fuel shipped up here, particularly up to Portland, would actually come out of Bay Area refineries. That just doesn't happen anymore because in California, used to export a lot of fuel to neighboring states like Arizona, New Mexico. They can't do that anymore. They just don't have the product. So what goes into a price of diesel in Washington? Just round numbers here. And I want you to focus on the industry profit margin over on the right bottom corner there, 79 cents. You look at that, wow. There's billions and billions of gallons sold here in the United States. The oil industry is getting rich, aren't they? Yes, they're the reason for all of this. Okay, yeah, that's all. When you look at the oil industry as a whole and you look at the net operating income, you look at the profit margin made by the industry over longer periods of time. Yes, there are periods that, right now, if you've got crude oil, you're making a lot of money. Yes, and if you can get it to market. But overall, you look at it historically, the oil industry is kind of middle of the pack. When you stack it up against other industries, transportation, software, health, medical, the oil industry is not top tier as far as profit margins. But when you look at that, you say, hey, 79 cents on a gallon of fuel, that's pretty good profit margin. That's for the people who are taking all the risks to go drill for that oil, refine it, get it to market, sell it out on the marketplace. Who actually makes more than the oil industry on the oil they sell? Your government. So it's funny when the politicians talk about the gouging. The government actually, when you look at it from a federal and state level, makes significantly more on every gallon of gasoline and diesel sold than the entire oil industry. Interesting fact, the state of Washington, which now has the highest amount of fees and taxes into a gallon of gasoline and diesel of any other state, the most, makes more, has more income coming in than multinational oil companies like Phillips 66. They're making more than major oil companies when it comes to how much they're raking in on fuel. So how much are they bringing in fuel? Well, the federal diesel tax, 24 cents. Distribution costs are about 65 cents to get the product to market. CFS, that is a Washington-specific tax, the carbon fuel standard. It's equating to about 10 cents. We're going to talk more about where that's going in coming years. Refining and marketing costs. Washington state diesel tax is now 58 cents. Just got raised this last year. CCA, that is the Climate Commitment Act. That's the cap and invest program here in the state. That number is actually a little bit low. Right now, last numbers, because this credit price does bounce around a little bit. Last number I saw was about 67 cents per gallon of diesel is going into for these credits. And then you've got the industry profit margin. So if you add up at a state level, there's about $1.25 of your cost of fuel is going to the state. Feds get 24 cents. Everybody's cool with that? Good. Okay. I know you're not cool with this. And I know you know a lot of this, but we can all carpool down to Olympia right now. Okay. Fuel excise tax, that's a pretty simple one. That's just the fuel tax for years. The cap and invest program, there is talk down in Olympia. I don't think they're in a huge rush to do it, but they're talking about linking our program with the brain trusts in California and Quebec so that we can get more moderation in our prices. Now, there was a lot more talk about this a couple of years ago when this first went into effect. I think the general public in Washington has been kind of lulled away. They don't really realize how much this is really impacting their prices. So the state government is not rushing, pushing as hard as I think they said they were going to link those credit markets, because our credit market has way outpaced like the credit market down in California. I think last time I saw for the California credit market, which is very similar, it was like $27 per allowance, and ours is at 65. So, and we're also significantly higher than Quebec. And that's just because of how the program's been designed by the state. We're not getting political, but let's just go there, okay. So, and of course, Jay Inslee said this would add 3 to 4 cents to a gallon, right? So, that's 65 bucks right now, equates to 67 cents per gallon on every gallon of diesel. The clean fuel standard is one that is not quite as well known as the cap and invest. So let's talk a little bit about that. So this is the cap and invest, and this shows where the prices have gone historically as far as these credits that industry participants like Christensen are having to pay. So if you're manufacturing or importing fuel, you have to buy, here in Washington, you have to buy these credits that offset the emissions from those products. And so that pricing is not static, it does jump around. The CFS, though, is going to get more interesting as we go forward. Right now, it's only adding about a dime to the cost of fuel today. But the way this program is set up, this is another state of Washington program, is this is the percentage of emissions that are supposed to be reduced. And so over time, this program is set up so that the credits that have to be purchased by industry participants like Christensen is going to continue to ramp up. You can see today in 26, we're only at 7%. And that's driving about a dime a gallon cost. By 2038, there's supposed to be a 45% reduction, so it's going to go up 6-fold. We would estimate that that would end up, that could potentially add another 60 cents a gallon if the program stays intact and keeps operating the way it has been. It's hard to predict where these credit markets go, but it is a significant cost that just really doesn't get talked about. It's just got built in, and it's something that would be good for the public to know that. Ag exemption. Anybody in here haul ag commodities with your fleets? There is an exemption on the cap and invest program that if you haul ag commodities, so if you're involved in agriculture or you're hauling ag commodities, you are not supposed to be paying for the cost of the cap and invest. And many fleets are taking advantage of that exemption. Obviously, it's important because it's 40 to 60 cents. So if you're eligible for that, it's important to be getting that. That exemption does end, I believe it is 2030. I think it was a 5-year exemption. So maybe it's 2020, beginning of 2029, I think is when that exemption goes away. If you are hauling ag commodities, you should not be paying that cap and invest fee. You should be getting a discount. If you're buying fuel retail at a truck stop, for example, that fuel will have that cap and invest built into that price already. There are mechanisms for you to be able to get an exemption, get that money back. You can also prorate this. We have customers who, for their hauling businesses, they haul some ag commodities, but then they haul non-ag commodities. And the questions come up, well, can I get an exemption for the percentage of my business that's ag commodities? The fleets are responsible for signing an affidavit, which says, where you are attesting to what percentage of your hauling is ag commodities. So yeah, you can prorate it. Any fleets here running renewable diesel? The California market right now is about 70% renewable diesel. Why would you want to run renewable diesel? Because in some regions it's cheaper than petroleum diesel. In Oregon right now, renewable diesel is significantly cheaper than petroleum diesel. Another reason for running renewable diesel, I was just talking to one of our fleet managers out of our SeaTac facility today. We've been running renewable diesel for quite a while. He is estimating that we're getting almost double the life out of our DPFs. It just burns much cleaner. Now in Washington, what determines the price for renewable diesel, one is supply and demand, but also the credit markets. The credit markets from the low carbon fuel standards, like in California and Oregon and Washington, help support the use of renewables. The reason why renewable diesel is cheaper in Oregon is not because it's cheaper to manufacture. It's actually more expensive than petroleum diesel to manufacture. But the credit markets are such that the credits, and this does fluctuate. I'm not saying that renewable diesel is always cheaper, but the last several months in the Oregon market, we have seen renewable diesel at discounts as much as 30 cents below petroleum diesel. Renewable diesel is a drop-in fuel. It's very, from a molecular standpoint, it's very similar to petroleum diesel. It's not like biodiesel where we had to keep the two segregated. You can drop renewable diesel right on top of petroleum diesel. Really the only drawback, so there's a lot of pros to renewable diesel. If the pricing is there, it's definitely something to look at. It does burn cleaner, less emissions. If you got DPF units in your fleet, it burns cleaner, so you just have less maintenance, ongoing maintenance with those systems. The other thing with renewable diesel though, similar to biodiesel, the cold flow properties are kind of like biodiesel, so it will gel up at higher temperatures than regular petroleum diesel. So that's one thing that fleets, California, it's much more prominent just because a lot of fleets down there don't have to worry about diesel gelling up. We have to worry about that a little bit more here in the northern climate. So we get a lot of questions around, so let's switch gears and talk about, well, what can we do? Prices are high, we know that, we know what's driving the prices at both the global, national, and state level. What's going on, or what are some things that we can do as owner-operators? We get a lot of questions around, are there better economics as fleet operators to have fuel on site, at a cardlock, or at retail? The way we like to look at it is, retail is typically your highest price if you're filling up, say, at a truck stop. Obviously, you can negotiate your own deals sometimes with those truck stop operators. If you're buying at a commercial cardlock facility, you can typically expect to save 10 to 20 cents from full truck stop retail prices. On site, you have your own bulk tanks. You're typically saving anywhere from 25 to 40 cents even compared to what you would be buying at a retail truck stop. We work with a lot of customers who want to do the math to say, okay, would it be better to have on-site fuel, or is it better to fuel up over the road? And we help people do a lot of calculations. Obviously, having on-site fuel with regulations, cost of the tanks and fueling systems and all that, you got to take that all into account. But having these numbers is helpful for calculating those economics. Another thing that can be done, especially if you're bidding jobs, so we see this a lot in the construction space, we also see it in the ag space a lot, is locking in future pricing. We're able to lock fuel prices in up to 24 months into the future. And so this is called a fixed forward contract, and that's another option for folks. There is a premium that typically applies to that, but the people who would like to lock those input prices in so they don't have that future risk of where the inputs would go. Me personally, yeah, 5 months ago, I wish I would have locked in a lot of fixed forwards. But it's hard to have a crystal ball. So that's why we mainly see customers like in ag and construction who really do worry about, because they've got a fixed bid price that they're getting for the job. Things to look for as we close out this year, we see that there's probably an 80 cent per gallon swing, maybe even more in the future months. That could go 80 cents higher or lower. It just really depends on what we see happens in the Middle East. Refinery turnaround season, we could see prices swing 15 cents pretty easily. That'll happen in the fall after we get through the busy summer season. The other thing that we're going to be watching, I'll highlight this one here, the California, Quebec, Washington linkage for our credit program. If our legislation and the Department of Ecology really work on this year, because there was talk about linking those two programs in 2027, that could drive prices down 30 cents or more just by getting a more moderate credit prices. So we hope to see that. We'll see what happens. Just summarizing what we talked about today, if you're running ag commodities, look to see if you're getting that exemption. If you are worried about future prices, there's an opportunity to lock in pricing for future months. If you are buying retail, look to see if you can buy either at a cardlock program or on site. Look at renewable diesel. Be asking your supplier questions about renewable diesel. In some markets, it's actually cheaper. And the last one is, and if you can find a distributor who can see the future, have them talk to me, because I'd like to talk to them.
So out of the 12 industries you have listed as solutions, from your perspective, what do you see as the industry that has the most growth today versus maybe the rest of them?
The most growth, we do a lot in the data center space. Another little dirty secret, a lot of data centers are running on diesel. So you drive by a data center, you see all those big Caterpillar Cummins generators, they run a lot on diesel. So you see a lot of growth there. In certain markets, and also I also have somebody saying, in different regions, we see different sectors seeing a lot of growth. Down in the Southwest market, Arizona, for example, Utah, we're seeing a ton of construction growth. And it's been strong. That's been a strong industry here in Washington, but we're seeing demand there come off quite a bit. Because it is a global market. And so when you've got companies like Chevron, P66, even though they're US-based oil companies, they are selling those products on a global market. And if they can, for their crude oil, if they can get higher prices in other countries, some of that product's gonna go there. Because there's no restrictions on, if you've got crude oil, regardless of where you're getting it out of, there's no restrictions on who you sell to.